Okay, gentlemen, are you ready?
Certainly am.
Always.
Okay, we'll jump into this in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hi guys, and welcome to Geek Talk, where we talk deep and geek about pianos, keyboards, and synthesizers. I'm delighted today to have two legends on my channel. They are, of course, Mr. Gareth Jones and Daniel Miller. Gentlemen, how are you?
Good, thank you. I
Very
don't
good.
get a I don't get a mister.
Did I not call you Miss? Well, actually, Daniel, we were actually talking about this once within the channel, and I actually said that if this electronic music world, if it was related to gangster movies, you would be the Godfather.
I'm not religious, so I'm not sure about the God part.
Which means, Gareth, you'd have to be Pacino or something like that. But anyway, gentlemen, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me. Gareth, you're in London. Daniel, you're in Spain at the moment.
I'm in south of Spain, in Andalusia.
We don't feel sorry for you at all.
You no need to.
Now, let's talk about Sunroof. You've just about to release your second Sunroof album, which is Electronic Improvisations Volume 2. And just for reference, I have Volume 1 here on vinyl. But your second, the second album is released on the 17th of February. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And that's obviously on Mute Records.
It's on the Parallel series of Mute, which is a more of a niche label, shall we say?
Okay.
Where we belong.
Where we belong, yeah.
And Gareth, we obviously talk about this type of music a lot, and I think niche sums it up.
Well,
Well,
yeah, Daniel, go ahead.
well, electronic music is ubiquitous now in general. I mean, pretty much every record that is made uses electronics in some form or other. Whether if it's a live band, it'll be recorded onto a computer and then probably edited, and it depends what you call electronic music. But all pretty much all music made these days uses electronic music, some sort of electronic music technique, I would say.
And that goes actually right back, doesn't it, to the start of the recorded and broadcast form, I suppose.
Yeah. It depends. Yeah, I guess it just depends on your definition of electronic music.
It certainly doesn't have the same sort of romanticism or the sort of definition it did. Let's say, Daniel, sort of when we go back to the release of the Normal in 1978, back in those days, that was electronic music. And very often these days when artists say we're an electronic artist, it's kind of like, I use the same argument, which you've just so perfectly stated, Daniel. Obviously, Gareth, I just want to talk a little bit about your electrogenetic, and I just want to make a shout out to the guys and girls watching this. This was Gareth's debut album as a solo artist, Electrogenetic, and what I have here is a vinyl copy. We still have some of these available. This is from the first pressing. These are signed and numbered. Great record, just for, not only for atmosphere, but for, for quality of production and everything.
I think, I'm not sure, but I think the first Sunroof record predates that. There was a flow started with the Sunroof project that spilled over into other areas of my life. Obviously Sunroof goes back decades, because we started improvising together when we were mucking about in the studio back in the 80s in Shoreditch, actually, where I still am stuck. I'm still stuck in Shoreditch. So those were the seeds of the Sunroof project. When Daniel and I'd finish a session with Depeche in the garden studio, and then we'd like jam in the evening for an hour or so, as Daniel so often puts it, just mucking about, really. And we never recorded anything. It was purely for the joy of playing, I suppose, jamming. And
Yeah, because when you're working, with a band like Depeche with, great songwriting and very structured songs, even though you're pushing it a lot with the sounds, it's very different to just like it's a very disciplined process. And I think it was a bit of a head cleaning exercise once the band went home back to Basildon, just to have a bit of a muck around and just like kind of free the mind a little bit, which was great after a session, but also possibly informed the next day as well in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, every time we make music in the studio, or every time we make music, it informs the next stage of the journey, doesn't it?
Yeah.
One of the I mean, I don't know how, but one of the things about I realized just recently, because of course we're working on volume 3 now, because now we've started, we can't stop. But I realized that every time I'm in the studio with Daniel on the Sunroof project, and possibly actually on our commissioned work that we've done in the past as well, we're always doing something new. I never know what I'm going to do, and afterwards I always think, oh, I did something that I'd never done before, which is obviously great, because it's like turning a corner and seeing a new view.
Yes. Yes. And that's, Gareth, that's actually something we've spoken about a lot with stuff like this. And, some people have liked to, to define this as almost like electronic jazz, because in the example that Daniel just used earlier on, if you take the traditional bands like Depeche Mode, their songs, they're written, they have a structure, and you have to build, around that structure. Whereas this is very, very different. This to me is a lot like your painting, Gareth. It's abstract. So, when you go for a performance, it's not like a conventional band where you have your songs. You just, it can happen or it can't happen. What was that performance I saw you gentlemen in? It was North London last year.
No, South London. It
was it South London? I'm sorry, I got my bearings wrong.
A very nice venue called Eclectic.
That's right. That's right.
Sorry, Eclectic. Yeah.
And
I think the connection with jazz. I think I think the biggest connection with jazz. Obviously, it doesn't sound like jazz.
No, of course.
I think with all improvisation, whatever the genre, it's about listening to what the other person or other people are doing and responding to it. It's like a call and response in a way. And I think that's, when you're improvising, I think that's an important. Well, it's not important. It's vital to be listening to what the other person's doing, so you can work with that rather than just going off on your own kind of ego trip.
Well, you gentlemen have obviously are in good resonance with each other. I mean, obviously going back to, I don't want to say how many years, but you've been at this for a long time. So you have good, not only friendship chemistry, but also creative chemistry. And that obviously works well together.
Yeah, I mean, we're best of friends, and we're pretty good at collaborating, I would say, and, that really helps. Unfortunately for some people, when we're in our social life, we start talking about our work life and about modules, and that can kind of interfere with the social. That can more general social interaction. If we're at dinner with friends or wives, we try to be careful not to drift too much into nerdism. But sometimes it's just not possible.
That's been part of history, isn't it? That's a history for any geek, I think, or any nerd. You get, especially if you're with a like-minded person, and I know that I'm sure we all do it as well amongst ourselves. Suddenly we're off down in a land of jargon and devices that is only of interest to us. But that's part of the joy of it, I think. The exploring new fields like that. I did want to say the reason we've been able to produce work and release it as Sunroof is not just because we've known each other a long time. We did manage to form some kind of manifesto to help us through the challenges of actually completing work, and we had a few points on the first record, such as that basically, well, an early one was no editing and no overdubs and as little post-production as possible. Master, really.
And yeah, sorry, and time restricted, both in the time we spent recording and the length of the track.
Yeah. So we found all these limitations, I suppose you might call them, that were creatively helped us to finish stuff. You know, the more limitations we seem to set up, the more effective we seem to get at finishing pieces. The last Sunroof session we did, was almost unfeasible. There was a small gap of schedule. I think Daniel was on the way from one airport to another airport almost, and we grabbed the 2 or 3 hours, and we only managed to do one take of the patch. But I think we were both really pleased that we did do that. That was extremely limited. We didn't even have time for a bit of lunch or a spot of dinner like we often do. We just built the patches are always built from scratch. We turn up with empty modulars, unpatched modulars. We've no idea what we're going to do. We don't talk about what we're going to do, and that applied to the first record and the second record. And with the second record, I'd just like to mention that I think one of the things that was important to us, we felt the first record was very dense, and we enjoyed that density as we were making it. But with this second record, we aimed at making something less dense, more minimal. Is that fair, Daniel?
That's fair. Yes, no, that's about the only kind of discussion we had. That was really about the music. We didn't really, apart from that, we just let it flow as it came. I just want to say one thing. I don't think the manifesto that we made for the first record was limiting. I think it was more about guidelines rather than limitations. I personally wouldn't call them limitations, rather like guidelines, really.
I get that. I suppose I'm using limitations in a very positive way. I'm very aware of the fact that if I hem myself into a little area, I can do something in that area. But if I leave myself infinitely free, then I don't do anything. But
and we even did that on the, when we worked together on the first Depeche records. We because there's so many possibilities, you have to start setting some guidelines. Things like no presets. Back, for instance, we wouldn't use presets. We hardly used polyphonic instruments. We tried to make our own drum sounds. Those kind of things, just to give us a bit of a framework, really, to work within.
And of course, we were limited, but with a 22 tracks on the tape recorder. It was a 24-track tape recorder, one track for timecode and one track for click. That left 22 tracks. And that, looking back, at the time, that seemed like a huge luxury, having worked on like 4 tracks in the bedroom and stuff. But looking back, that was a great limitation as well.
Well, Gareth, I'm glad you brought up this talk about, the subject of limitation. And there's it's not my saying, but there's a great saying that goes, necessity is the mother of invention. And certainly, Gareth, we often talk about this. Gareth, your words of wisdom have helped me a lot with my production. And as I coach students and stuff. And one of your sayings that I always tell my students, and I say, Gareth always has taught me, our job is not to judge it, it is to make it. Now, coming on to limitations and stuff, and Daniel, you were talking about with the way you work now. Certainly these days, what I find is, it's this overwhelm of, there's so much technology. And I guess what I like to tell people is, if we go back to the great stuff, you gentlemen did earlier on, it's kind of mind-boggling when I listen to those earlier records and I go, if I look back what was available back in those days technologically, what you guys did, you guys were really pushing the frontiers of that. These days, it's almost like the opposite. We have to almost intentionally limit ourselves. So I guess the question is, I'm going to ask you, Daniel, is how do you think, with the advent of music technology, coming to where we are now, do you think that's kind of hindered the creative process in a way?
Well, I think of course, it's given the possibilities to so many more people to make music than back when I was when I started. And I think that's a great thing. You know, the technology is there. If you have a laptop or even an iPad or something like that, you can make music. I think one of the problems that I come across in my day job as in a record company is people find it much more difficult to finish things.
Yes.
Because you can always add another hi-hat here, another string pad overdub there. And I suppose on some projects, one of my jobs is to listen with fresh ears to what somebody's done. I say, it's too much. And then they might say, well, we worked on that sound for 3 days. I don't care. You know, you're attached to it because you worked on it, not because it's necessarily, you know, any good. So it's difficult. I mean, I think people, you know, I do a little bit of teaching as well, occasionally, and I say to the students who have obviously got Logic or Ableton or whatever, just use 8 tracks. Just use 8 tracks, and they look at me like as though I'm completely, you know, off my head or completely crazy, because that's not something that's in their experience at all. They just can do. But I say it's very useful to do that, because then you really think about what's important and what's not important, and what's an embellishment and what's a necessity. I don't know if they actually ever did that, to be honest, but because I don't teach. But you know, when I made my first record, I got a 4-track for the first time, and before that I'd just been doing stuff on stereo. And today a 4-track would, like, people would, you know, think that's a terrible limitation, but actually it was incredible liberation to be able to actually overdub and you know, working that way was an incredible liberation. So I don't see these things as limitations, really. It's more about a creative process where you think more about what you want to do, and you really strip it back. I mean, if I'd had an 8-track or a 16-track in those days, I probably would have done loads of overdubs.
Yeah.
And I don't think that, I think it certainly wouldn't have made it a better record. So I'm very happy about that, you know. And yeah. So it's a mixed picture, really. I mean, the technology is amazing, and there are incredible people who design it, and gives people the possibilities to make music who would never have been able to do that before. And I think that's a great thing. I think sometimes the music is good but not amazing. that's the thing, and it kind of floods. You know, I like exceptional music by exceptional artists, and I'm happy that other people who are not necessarily exceptional can make music, but sometimes it can get in the way, you know, on platforms like Spotify or whatever, of the really exceptional music.
I think that is definitely the thing now, with technology giving everyone an opportunity to do it. That is a positive thing, but of course there's the byproduct, which is there's just a lot of noise, and you've got to just, you know, you've got to try and sift through it. I can imagine running Mute. You know, you obviously get, not you personally, but you know, your creative, you know, the people who decide, they probably get bombarded on a daily basis with so much music, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some of these companies that say to an artist, you know, pay an amount of money and we'll get you in touch with all the A&R people in the industry. So we get a ton of stuff that is totally irrelevant to Mute. And if anybody had ever listened to a couple of Mute records, they would know that. But it's, so yeah, you get bombarded. Most of it is just, I'm not saying it's good or bad, it's just not relevant to what we like to do, you know.
I want to bring it back onto Sunroof, but there is just a question I want to ask you, Daniel. You know, I did it's one of these videos. I actually put up a thumbnail about a video I was going to make about Mute records, and people said, "Where's that video, Vaughn?" And the thumbnail actually said, "Mute Records, arguably the most important record label in the history of electronic music." And of course, you know, of course, some people came back and said, "What about factory records and stuff and everything?" I guess what I was trying to say was,
I think the word arguably is the key word.
Yes, I did put the word arguably in just to be a bit more PC, but I just think to me, I was, now that now that I've got more confidence in what I'm saying, I might just say it is. But I guess the question I'm trying to want to ask is, and obviously in my channel, I'm well known for doing the Depeche Mode album review series. I reverse engineer the albums and go into a lot of detail to a point that it's just beyond geekiness. But I've often said, and not to flatter, but I've often said that you, Daniel, I give you the, I did a shout out where I said, I think you're very important in the longevity of not only Depeche Mode, but the other bands. And for example, Depeche Mode went through that period where they lost their songwriter and Martin took over. And long story short, had they been signed to a bigger label, the label would have said, no, you need to do another song, like Just Can't Get Enough. And they would have fizzled out. So I've often said that it was because of you that gave them the flexibility and allowed them to do a really off-the-wall album like Black Celebration. I guess what I'm saying is Mute was a very unusual label as far as I'm concerned, because obviously you want to make money, but you actually allowed the artists the creative freedom, whereas with other labels it was like, no, you need to release this kind of thing. Does that am I reading that the right way? Does that make sense the way I've said it?
Yeah. I mean, it for me, it's not something that I think about. It's just sort of second nature, really. I mean, I suppose, Mute is a label that I would be, I wanted to make it a label that I would be happy to be signed to, as an artist. I mean, I didn't really think about it in such concrete terms, but it just came naturally, really. And I think, when you believe in artists, you have to give them the space to make mistakes or to create. I mean, another example, I guess, would be Moby, where he made a really great electronic pop record and had some really big dance hits, and then made Animal Rights, which was a punk rock record, which kind of, in principle, which kind of just on a temporary basis anyway, destroyed his career. I mean, but that, Would Play, which became a, massive seller, probably one of the biggest records on Mute, would that have happened if he hadn't done that one first? And if you believe in an artist and if you believe in their art and their talent, you have to give them the space, because you can't, it's the music business. We're in the music business, and there's a kind of a spectrum. On one end is music and the other one is business. And where are you on that as a company? Where are you on that spectrum? I think we're probably further towards music, but there's an element of business which has to be addressed as well. So yeah, giving artists creative space, because that's what I would want if I was I am with Gareth. We are artists on Mute, and the label gives us creative space, pretty much.
And it is interesting, and that is why I think don't take my word for it. Just speak to any the fans of my channel and stuff. Mute has just got such a good reputation for that, because it doesn't have the sort of sellout vibe to, a lot of labels, like, as we've got to make money and stuff. So I'm sure there are all those labels that'll have their great artists, but then they try to diversify their portfolio and go down certain. With Mute, it's always been, and I can, rattle off the name, ramble off the names. It was, Nitzareb, and there was Erasure and Depeche Mode, and all very different types of artists, but they were all very, very credible, and they, and unique, because they were given that freedom without,
Yeah, and non-electronic artists as well. We had a very long relationship with Nick Cave for over 30 years.
Of course, yeah.
For instance, yeah. But yeah, I mean, I like the idea of a long relationship of artist development. And working with an artist, which also means that when we start to work with or we decide to work with an artist, there are lots of different elements that come into play that are important. It's not just about the music. It's also about, do we feel there's a creative relationship that we can work together on? So those are important things. It's not just the music, although the music is where it starts, but you have to feel that you can have some kind of creative relationship with the artist as well.
Absolutely.
I think Sunroof, a good example of that, because think we spent about 35 years developing the creative relationship before we made any music at all.
Gareth, you
Yeah,
just
you
read
know.
my mind there. You just read my mind there, because I was literally going to say, you know, Gareth, obviously you and I met just before COVID, and it was so interesting. The question was, I was like, why now? Why are you only starting to do music now? So, and I think Daniel, obviously you had, you started with the normal and warm leatherette. So, so you've kind of gone full circle. Whereas Gareth, you're kind of like a newbie in this thing. So, so are you enjoying this? Do you find this, what are your feelings on?
Well, yeah, I mean, if it was, oh, go ahead.
Well,
If it wasn't
yeah,
enjoyable, if it wasn't enjoyable, we wouldn't be doing it.
absolutely. We're not doing it for the money.
No, we know there's no money in it anymore, do we, Gareth?
For the fame.
We
All the
are
fame.
treading out a little bit though. Now we're doing a very small European tour in April, right? Yeah, in April we're doing
European
Bristol,
and UK. Yeah.
we're doing Germany and the UK. We're doing a gig in Hamburg and a gig in Berlin, and a Bristol, and we're going back to Eclectic, I think, Vaughn, where you came and heard us.
Yes.
We've
Well,
we played in Barcelona as well recently. So that's a whole new aspect. With the live work, we have a rehearsal, so we prepare a patch, but it's still improvised. We don't. There's a complete. Often the live, I would say, probably every time, isn't it? The live show is completely different from the rehearsal, even though it's the same patch. I'm personally a bit too scared at the moment to go on stage with nothing patched.
Well, this is where you read my mind again, Gareth, because that was it's almost like you've got my questions there, and it's kind of like the question I wanted to ask was, obviously, with bands that have songs and rehearsed, do you go live and make it up completely? But you, as you say, you set a patch, so you have like some basis to work from. But with this type of music, sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. Is that fair to say? Like sometimes you really get into a flow.
Yeah, I mean, that's the nature of improvisation, really,
Yeah.
isn't it? And sometimes it works better than other times. Hopefully it works at some level on every time. But, I used to go to back in the day, I used to go to quite a few free jazz gigs.
Yeah, likewise.
And sometimes it was amazing, or there was like, if an hour of improvisation, there was 10 magical moments, 10 magical minutes, and sometimes the rest of it was a bit there. Hopefully, we play for roughly 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how we feel, partly. And hopefully that's, there's 30 or 40 minutes of good moments, but there could well only be 10 minutes of good moments, but that's fine as well, because it's the nature of what we do.
Absolutely. And I just want to talk about little extracurricular activities. As Gareth, we know obviously you're a budding watercolorist, and obviously we've spoken about that on the channel here. Daniel, I believe you're into street photography. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's tailed off a little bit, but yes, I am very much. And some of that, and what street photography to me is, because it can be interpreted in different ways. It's not photographs of streets. It's catching the moments of interrelationships between people in real time. And it's very kind of secretive. You don't tell people you're taking pictures of them. You just take the picture, and if it's something close up, you would say, "Thank you very much. I hope that's okay." Blah blah blah. I never really had, only once or twice had a real problem. But I can relate it. I can relate because it's very much of the moment. It's a 1/100th of a second or something like that of the exposure. It's very much like working with Modular. You pick a moment, you work, you're watching, you're looking around the street, which is somehow like patching. And then you get a moment when everything comes together and you take the picture. And in a way, that's how it works with Modular. And, I can relate it in my head anyway. And I've done a couple of talks about the relationship between street photography and modular synthesis. I'm not sure really how successful they were, but, I try to explain that. And I think one of the things that I learned from street photography, which we've specifically applied to our project is what's that noise? Is not listening to the records, not listening to the music for quite a while. I let it sit there in, because I think and that's the same with street photography. When you look at a photo that you've just taken, or you try to judge that photo, you're not just judging the photo. How you feel, how you felt, the weather, the situation builds into that kind of judgment, and that's not really judging the photo very well. So when you take a step back, leave it for a couple of months, then you make a judgment based purely on what the photograph is, not how you felt when you were making it. And that's the same with us, I think, with the music. That really helps. And then we listen to it maybe a month later, or even if it's a couple of weeks later, or whatever. You tend to forget you forget how you felt about it at the time. And so when we listen back after a few weeks or a month, we don't know who played what. We listen to that. That's pretty good. Did I do that bit? That's a really good bit. Was that me or was that Gareth? Or we'd actually forget, who did what. And that gives you a very good, way of judging the music purely on a musical basis.
It gives you that separation. It's a little bit, gentlemen, like, when you're doing a mix and you're working close with something, that this one part becomes so important. You do need to step back, and so you can hear the whole, which is the whole idea of it.
We took that philosophy from Daniel, inspired by a photographer. I don't know who it was, but this idea, we took that to extremes on the first Sunroof record. We didn't listen. We probably recorded the whole record or material for the whole record before we listened to anything. And then at some stage we thought, we've got quite a lot of material now. Let's have a listen, like 9 months, perhaps 8 or 9 months after we started recording. And that was fantastic in terms of like regaining perspective. Absolutely fantastic. And as Daniel said, you've heard our music. Sometimes even when we're recording the music, I'm not sure who's making what sound. I have to fade something out and think, is that me? Or, oh no, it can't. I'm faded out. It can't be me. It must be Daniel.
Well, that's good, because there's not going to be any rock and roll fallouts, because of the bassist. Turn the bass up, and then the drummer's like, turn the drummers up. The drums up. You always you have that understanding. It's all about the whole. But I just want to talk about some of the. Coming back, some of the limitations. Gareth, you say you've limited this to 8. You guys have limited this to 8 tracks. Is that right?
What do you mean?
So you said one of the on the manifesto was to actually limit it to 8 tracks.
No. Daniel made a suggestion in his teaching about 8 tracks. Sunroof is generally 4 tracks.
Oh, 4 tracks.
It's stereo from Daniel.
I beg your pardon.
From me.
Okay. So it's only okay.
And I believe one of the pieces actually we recorded on the first record. I can't remember which one it was. We recorded straight to stereo because that was the only way we could do it in that particular room we were in. But generally we record to 4 tracks.
And Gareth, much like you did with Electrogenetic, it's going in, creating a patch, getting a vibe, and then you've got to listen to it and take the segment that you like the most.
Most of the Sunroof work, we take complete pieces. We aim. I suppose I think we both learned from years of spending mesmerizing hours in front of analog sequences and modular evolving textures. We both realized that we haven't really got the patience or the skill or the time to edit very long improvisations. So one of the things we've been really keen on is really 5 to 10 minutes max.
I see.
So that what we're aiming at is to say, well, that was a good 6-minute flow, an arc. Daniel often talks about the arc of the piece, which is very hard to maintain in editing. Whereas if you're in the zone or in flow or whatever you want to call it, when you're improvising together, you naturally have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yes,
which we find appealing. So we're not doing in contrast actually to some of the work I did on Electrogenetic, where I did stupidly long improvisations and then spent weeks trying to edit them down. We don't do that. We almost run a clock. We watch the timer on Ableton or we run a stopwatch or something, and then we look at it and we go, we don't talk when we're recording, except sometimes towards the end, one of us will go, oh, look, 7 minutes, time to, so that's helped us enormously. It's another limitation, a time limitation. It's helped us enormously.
Yeah, I think I picked this up when I was at your performance that time, and there's relevance to what I'm saying now. I think it was Bono who once said something. He said the closest you can get to another man without being in a relationship with him is being in a band with him. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. So with you two, when I was watching your live performance there that time, you indeed weren't talking to each other, but it was like it's like you can almost read each other's minds because there is eye contact. But then it was fascinating to watch because there was it had that big screen, and just watching you, and you seem to, Daniel, you especially, you seem to go into like a trance. You kind of like just this really calm look in your face, and then you sometimes look up, and then Gareth's looking. It was interesting to watch because it's like you're like this, and then Gareth will look at you, and then you can't see him, but you'll actually look up. You know he's looking at you, and it was just you guys were like really in sync with each other. It was, yeah. So it must be the years of.
The reason I was in a bit of a trance was because one of my oscillators stopped working. I couldn't figure out what was wrong. So,
and I do think there are those happy accidents where something goes, and then people, and of course the audience don't know if it's was that meant to be. So I think that's the beauty of it. I think, Gareth, didn't you say you gave someone a dirty look when he said, "How do you know when you've made a mistake?" Was that Dave Smith who said that? Someone said as a joke.
Yeah. I can't remember the context, but yeah, Dave Smith did say something like I read a very interesting interview with a member of Miles Davis band, a keyboard player, and I'm sorry I don't know his name, one of the keyboard players who spoke about he was absolutely mortified in one concert because he played a wrong chord, and he was so mortified, and of course, the cliche in jazz is, if you play something wrong, repeat it, blah blah blah, therefore it's not wrong anymore. But he said, Mr. Davis paused for a moment and then picked up on this chord and went with it. And for a long time he thought, this was like that's what you do. That's the jazz cliche. Obviously, these are prodigiously talented musicians. And then the gentleman said, many years later, he realized that Miles hadn't even heard it as a mistake. Well, even though it was a new chord that was not in rehearsal, he'd not heard it. And that, to me, that's wonderful. That's like transcendental work. And that's, I suppose, that's, when Daniel and I improvise together and record stuff, there's no question of mistake. There's no. I never think, oh, Daniel just fucked up. No, because it's not about that. It's about the continual building and interacting with the sounds as they come out of the modulars.
There was a great musician, I think it may have been Herbie Hancock, the pianist, and he basically said something like, there are no such, because sometimes you play something, there's a wrong note. Okay, in pop music, artists make mistakes, but he said it beautifully. He also was, but like you were saying, Daniel, it's like, like music is life, and how you associate your photography with your music, and it's the same thing. And Daniel, Gareth, like you with your watercolors, but Herbie went on to say there are no wrong notes. There are just certain notes which work better at that moment. So and that was so liberating to think that there's no mistakes. What I mean? A bit philosophical, I apologize.
We should call our next album 10 Mistakes.
10 mistakes. Well, there we go. You heard it here first, guys, on the Vaughn George channel. But listen, this is really exciting. So I'd love to. Obviously, we'll connect, Gareth, because we're in touch. Give me the dates and stuff, and I'd love to share. Because Gareth, you've become a lot more. I don't want to say available, but you're really out there on social media now. Like, I know when you go on tour, you did that thing where you photographed your suitcase all over the place, and it's quite nice for to do little video clips like that. And I'd really love to get behind this, with any little video clips and stuff like that, because it's very exciting. come to the
I'm the
gigs.
social media genius behind the
You
Sunroof's
are.
invincible rise. The
And
Grammys, here we come.
and also what's nice is, as well, as I say, what you gentlemen have you've done so many great things. You've got nothing to prove. So it's quite nice this must just be so this must be so enjoyable for you. You know what I mean? Because you've got nothing to prove.
Well,
yeah, I mean, yeah, nothing to prove really, apart from enjoying it.
Exactly.
What do you think, Gareth? I mean, nothing to prove. I don't know.
I agree. Well, we touched on this yesterday. It's important, I feel, to understand that making art is not a competition. So it's only if you've got something to prove, that sounds like it's in the context of a competition. And Sunroof are not in competition with anyone. We're not in competition. We're trying to walk our path. And share our discoveries with people. And it's one of the great joys of modular electronics for me is there is a voyage of discovery. I'm constantly amazed and delighted and surprised by what the electronics offers back to me, thanks to the genius of the makers who have made all this incredible stuff.
And the market's very, very competitive at the moment. So there's definitely no shortage of. When I went to Synthfest in Sheffield last year, of course, Daniel, you live in Berlin. I know you guys there. You've obviously got Super Booth there, which is on a different level. But there's definitely no shortage. But I suppose I don't want you to necessarily give any endorsements here. But is there something, a piece of gear that you always take with you, or it's always in your rig, gentlemen?
Yeah, for me, I guess it would be the 512 vector sequencer, which is the sort of, which controls the things, whatever the modules do. That's something for me that's really important, and it's a really great tool. And it wouldn't necessarily suit everybody, but it certainly suits my way of working. I mean, as you say, I mean, when there's so many, if you go on Modular Grid, which is what's kind of the home of sort of modular information and stuff, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of firms, mostly like 1 or 2 person companies making these modules on the kitchen tables, and they all have something to give, and I think it's amazing the way it's exploded. When I first got into Eurorack, because I was into modular before that, but when I first got into Eurorack, there were maybe 10 manufacturers, and now there's 10,000, or there's probably not 10,000, at least 1,000.
And slightly off topic, but relevant. Unfortunately, a lot of these little ones have gone under due to the microchip shortage.
Yeah, I'm not sure how. Not too many. I think actually one of the bigger ones has closed down.
WMD, are you talking about?
WMD, yeah. That's very sad. They made some really great modules. I think for a lot of people, for especially the very small companies, they're not making their living from this, almost like a hobby for them as it is for us to make the music.
Yes.
It's a hobby for them to make the modules. And I think it's just more like there's a lot of delays. Sometimes you have to wait a long time, but it doesn't matter because waiting makes it even better.
Yes.
And back to because I do think it's super interesting what you're saying about stuff that's always in the rack. And Daniel gave a very interesting answer, which is the core sequencer that he uses. What you might interpret from that is actually the sound, the rest of the rack is completely fluid, and that's one of the great joys of the field, Vaughn. I know you don't work with Eurorack really, but it's one of the fact that you rebuild the instrument every couple of months almost. You think, okay, I've tried this combination, now I'm going to have a total rethink. I've been inspired by that recently because the recent Sunroof sessions, we seem to have done quite a few in my little studio here. And so rather than arrive with one rack, as Daniel does, Daniel turns up with a couple of smallish racks that he puts on the table. I've got a general mishmash of modules behind me, and I just like pick and choose across the modules, and that's been wonderful. And my performance racks and my traveling racks continually changing. Sunroof have had quite a little phase now where one of the things that I've been doing, I think actually we've done a number of pieces where I've exclusively only sampled Daniel's rack. I've had no, if you like, sound generating modules running. So I've been using like a convention, like a bitbox micro sampler that's like a conventional hardware sampler in many ways, but also using a tape looper style samplers and the Morphogene granular samplers, and that's been conceptually really, really interesting for me, and I suppose for Sunroof, I hope as well. The fact that the all the raw material I'm taking from Daniel, and I'm not really taking 5-second riffs or anything. I might be taking fragments and transposing them, reversing them, processing them, and that's been a super interesting real-time flow. Partly because in many ways it kind of arcs right back to when we started in the garden studio jamming, where I was, as a young engineer, I wasn't really playing the synths, I was playing the effects. And recently Sunroof have had a little phase of doing that. And it's a rather different outcome from 40 years ago, but conceptually tied back decades back to that. So samplers have been the core elements in my rack recently, but that's about to change, and has changed actually on the last Sunroof session we did in here for the third album. I didn't sample anything that Daniel was doing. I took a break from that. So
it puts a lot of responsibility onto me for creating the sound in the first place.
No, I was gonna say there's no ego, but it's going to come in at some point.
No, I think it's a really interesting way of working. Yeah, definitely. And I don't feel any pressure at all. Just records.
Good.
Daniel, do you still have your ARP 2600?
Absolutely.
I was going to say that. Okay. Yeah. I thought it'd be a silly question, but I've got to ask it for the fanboys. And I just want to say to the viewers watching this, links in the description below to everything. We're going to put the links to everything. And I also just want to make a shout out on the 17th of October last year, Gareth we did an event with Brian Griffin and Gareth graced us with a stunning performance recorded in quad. I don't know if you've heard that, Daniel. It's now available on Bandcamp. It's actually called, and I love with Gareth, he's actually, he doesn't big things up. It was at the Ship and Whale, so he calls it Live at the Ship and Whale. It was just a pub in southeast London. So really enjoyed that performance. Have you heard it, Daniel? Or
I've certainly heard parts of it. I was extremely impressed. Yeah,
I played you some in the flat. That's right.
Yeah,
we listened to quite a bit in the flat. That's when my wife heard it as well. So.
And this is the leading question I'm coming to, gentlemen, is because obviously I'm a huge fan of Electrogenetic, but when I heard Sunroof, it is distinctly different. And is that intentional, or is it how do you, because you're obviously got different approaches and stuff, but it is distinctly different. So is that intentional, or how do you?
I wouldn't say it's intentional. It just is what it is, really.
Okay.
I mean, instead of one person's expression, it's two people working together's expression. And it's like and it's different. If I did a solo record, it would be different again, so yeah.
Would you ever do a solo? Would you ever do another solo record, Daniel? Is that something you'd toyed with or not?
No comment.
Okay, I see that.
You heard it here first.
I heard it here first. Well,
no comment. Sunroof's a conversation, you see, between two people. And there's no, other than the manifesto, which is not about the music but about the approach. There is no plan. The plan is in the approach, and then we turn up and then we improvise. We really are, it's there, right there in the name on the records, right? Electronic music improvisations.
You know what I like about that?
We're really into that, Vaughn.
It actually says what it does on the tin, as they say. It is really that. Well, listen, gentlemen, as I say, we could clearly go on for ages. And Daniel, while I've got you here, I don't want to trap you and get you to say yes, but I would love to, when time permitting, at some point, do an interview with you again, just regarding you and Mute, and just more about, because I know, gentlemen, I know you've both spoken about the whole Depeche Mode thing and the artist, but I'm always, and one thing I do on my channel, which I'm proud of, is when I interview people, I like to know who they are. What's your story? How did you get started? Because I think that is often a story that is overshadowed, because you've done the great artist. So people always tend to talk about the artist. I'm always interested in what your story is. So I'd love to do an origins story about Daniel Miller, Mute. And of course, if you're up for that, time permitting.
Sure.
Thank you
Absolutely.
so much. Well, listen, gentlemen, let's just get into some final words on Sunroof. When is the tour, the world tour, kicking off? It is a world tour. Because I think when you went on tour with Kankis, Gareth, I said it's a world tour, and you went, no, Vaughn, it's just a European tour. That's what I love about Gareth. He's not into he always brings things back. He's not into the over promotion stuff. So when does your European tour start?
It starts on the 9th of April.
7th
of April. I'm very unprofessional. 7th of April, which is Good Friday, I believe, in Bristol.
Okay.
And then it's on the 10th of April, which is Easter Monday, at Eclectic in Southeast London. Then in Berlin, it's on the 13th of April at Silent Green.
Yeah.
And we're very Faust are playing on the same bill, so that's a real honor for us, for me anyway, to share the stage with Faust.
Absolutely.
And then on the 15th, it's in Hamburg at the Golden Poodle, legendary Golden Poodle Club. And that's the tour as it stands at the moment.
Well, that's great. Well, as I say, gentlemen, there's this huge Depeche Mode wave coming now as well. So I should think Berlin and those places are going to be just heaving. So it's also all very, very exciting. So some great things to come. This is a great time for electronic music. Well, as you said, Daniel, there's no such thing as electronic music anymore. Everything's electronic to some point. Okay, gentlemen, well, there we go. So that is Electronic Improvisations Volume 2, out on the 17th of February on Mute Records. Gentlemen, I thank you so much for your time. This has been a real highlight for the channel. Really appreciate it, and hopefully we can speak to you again at some point.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
Thank you, Vaughn. Nice to talk to you again.
All the best. Cheers, gentlemen.
Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.